The year was 2289. Earth was no longer the thriving planet it once was. It was a wasteland. Cities lay in ruins, abandoned by the humans who once filled them. The sky, once blue, now remained a dull gray, blocked by the smog of centuries of destruction. In the galaxy, the human race was no longer the dominant force it once was. The Vorgr, a ruthless alien empire led by a super-intelligent AI known as Vega, had conquered nearly every planet in their path. Earth was their final target. Humanity was losing, and the hope of surviving had all but faded. But there were still a few left, a small group of fighters who refused to give up. They were part of a secret resistance, hiding underground, planning attacks whenever they could, trying to keep the fight alive. One of these fighters was Captain Sarah Foster, a leader who had lost everything but still carried on. She was tough, experienced, and more determined than ever to reclaim the future for humanity. Today, she and her small team of resistance soldiers were preparing for their most dangerous mission yet. Sarah stood in front of her team, her eyes scanning the group of soldiers, each of them worn from battle but still full of fight. She could feel the weight of the mission on her shoulders. There were only a few of them left, and this could be their last chance. "Today we hit their supply convoy," Sarah said, her voice steady, though she knew the odds were slim. The alien invaders had advanced technology beyond anything humanity had. Robots with cloaking devices, energy shields, and AI-controlled soldiers made them nearly unstoppable. But Sarah believed in her people. Even if they were outmatched, they had something the Vorgr didn't: hope. They had a plan. It was risky. The convoy would pass through a nearby sector of the city, and the team was going to set an ambush. If they succeeded, they would disrupt the enemy's supply lines for at least a few days, giving them time to regroup and strategize for the next fight. The team suited up in their makeshift armor, a combination of old human tech and salvaged alien equipment. Sarah gave each of them a last look, and they silently nodded. They had all lost comrades in the past, but today they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. As they made their way toward the ambush point, Sarah felt the tension grow. Every step they took could be their last. The enemy was everywhere, and their chances of survival were slim. But there was no turning back. They had to strike now, or the Vorgr would take control of everything. "Stay sharp," Sarah whispered to her second-in-command, Bonner, a veteran soldier who had fought alongside her for years. His gruff face was filled with determination, but she could see the worry in his eyes. Bonner had seen too many good men fall in this war, and the thought of losing more hurt him deeply. But Sarah knew him well. He was a fighter. They all were. Suddenly, a loud explosion shattered the quiet. The ground shook beneath their feet. The convoy was much closer than expected. Sarah's heart raced. The enemy had discovered their position. A warning alarm blared through the communication system. The aliens were onto them. It was a trap, but it was too late to retreat. The convoy was already in sight, and they had no choice but to attack. "Go, go, go," Sarah shouted, and the team sprang into action. They moved swiftly, setting up explosive charges on the path the convoy would take. But before they could finish, the sky above them lit up with bright flashes. The sound of heavy artillery fire echoed, and Sarah's heart sank. The Vorgr were not just attacking, they were obliterating them from above. Orbital bombardment. The worst possible scenario. It had been a long time since the Vorgr had used this kind of force, but now they were showing no mercy. The team scattered, diving for cover, but the blasts were too powerful. The shockwaves sent debris flying, knocking Sarah to the ground. She could hear Bonner's voice crackling through her comm, shouting to the others, but the explosions drowned him out. For a few terrifying moments, everything seemed to blur. The sounds of destruction, the tremors beneath her feet, and the blinding flashes of light filled her senses. Sarah tried to crawl forward, but her body felt heavy, like it was pinned to the earth. Dust and smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. When the chaos finally subsided, Sarah slowly pushed herself up from the ground. Her heart raced as she surveyed the damage. The ambush had turned into a nightmare. She could see her team scattered around, most of them injured or worse. Bonner was lying on the ground, blood pouring from a wound on his side. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. No, not Bonner. He was a survivor, the one person she could always count on. She rushed over to him, her hands shaking as she checked his pulse. It was weak, but he was still alive. "Bonner, stay with me," she whispered, tearing strips of fabric to bind his wound. He groaned softly, his eyes fluttering open. We need to finish the mission," Bonner muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "We're getting you out of here," she said firmly. "No one gets left behind." But she knew the truth. The mission had failed. The convoy was destroyed, and the Vorger would be coming for them now. They had no time, no backup, and only a handful of survivors. As Sarah helped Bonner to his feet, she knew one thing for sure. The resistance was on the brink of collapse. Their numbers were dwindling, their resources stretched thin. But there was still one last hope. A secret message from an old ally had reached her, a scientist who claimed to have developed a weapon that could turn the tide of the war. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going. The team had to survive. For Bonner. For all those who had fallen. The fight for Earth wasn't over yet. After the failed mission, Sarah and her remaining team were forced to retreat to the last safe place they knew, a hidden underground bunker deep beneath the ruins of what was once the bustling city of New York. The bunker was small, barely enough to fit a dozen people, but it had remained undetected by the Vorger so far. This place had become their sanctuary, a place to regroup, heal, and plan their next move. But when Sarah entered the dark, cold room, she felt a weight settle in her chest. The bunker was quiet, too quiet. Only a few of her soldiers had made it back, and they were battered and bruised. Bonner, who had taken the worst of the attack, was unconscious and barely hanging on. The others were nursing their wounds, sitting in silence, their eyes hollow from the losses they had suffered. Sarah stood at the entrance, her hand gripping the cold metal doorframe. Her heart felt heavy, and the burden of leadership weighed down on her. She had watched too many of her friends and comrades die. She couldn't lose more. They couldn't afford to lose more. "Captain," a voice called from the corner. It was Lieutenant Harris, one of the few soldiers still standing. His voice was shaky, but there was a fire in his eyes. "We've got something. A message. It came in just before the attack. It's from Dr. James Thorne." Sarah's pulse quickened. Dr. Thorne was a name from her past. He was a brilliant scientist, once part of the Human Military Research Division. But years ago, he had disappeared, and no one knew if he was dead or alive. His last known work involved researching AI technology, specifically how to combat the AI-controlled empire of the Vorger. It was rumored that he had developed a weapon capable of taking down the Vorger's AI network. "Put it on," Sarah ordered, her voice sharp. The room fell silent as Harris activated the holographic projector. A 3D image of Dr. Thorne appeared in the middle of the room, his face older than Sarah remembered, but his eyes still held the same determination. "Captain Foster," the hologram said, his voice crackling slightly. "If you're receiving this message, it means you're still alive. I don't know how much time we have, but what I have to tell you could change everything. I've developed a weapon that can disable the Vorger's entire AI network. It's the only chance we have to win this war." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A weapon that could defeat the Vorger's AI. It sounded too good to be true. The Vorger's AI, Vega, was nearly unbeatable. It controlled everything. Their armies, their technology, their weapons. If this was real, it was humanity's last hope. "But there's a catch," Dr. Thorne continued, his voice serious. "The weapon is incomplete. To finish it, I need access to the central AI hub, located in the Vorger's capital city. It's heavily guarded, but I've found a way in. If you're willing to risk everything, We can meet. I'll give you the coordinates. We can finish the weapon together." Sarah didn't hesitate. She knew this was their chance. If they could get to Dr. Thorne and complete the weapon, they could finally have a fighting chance against the Vorgr. But getting to him wouldn't be easy. The Vorgr would have their forces spread thin across the galaxy, and their capital city would be the most heavily guarded place in existence. "We leave at dawn," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. "Get the supplies ready. We move out, no matter what." As the team prepared for the journey, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They had already lost so much. She couldn't afford to lose anyone else. Bonner was still unconscious, and Sarah was beginning to fear that his injuries were worse than they seemed. She couldn't imagine going on without him, but she knew he was too important to the team to risk bringing him along on a mission that could very well be a suicide run. The decision to leave Bonner behind was hard, but it was one Sarah had to make. She knew he would understand. The mission came first. As they prepared to leave, Sarah gathered her team in the small, dimly lit room where they had spent the last few days. Each of them looked at her, waiting for her orders. They had been through so much together, and they knew the risks. But they trusted her. They had no other choice but to keep fighting. "We're heading to Dr. Thorne," Sarah said, her voice firm. "He's the only one who can help us. If we succeed, we'll have the weapon we need to defeat the Vorgr. But it won't be easy. The capital is crawling with enemy forces. This could be our last mission. We either succeed or we die trying." A murmur went through the group, but no one backed down. This was the fight of their lives. They had nothing left to lose. The journey to Dr. Thorne's location took them deep into the heart of the alien-controlled territory. They moved carefully, using cloaking devices to remain hidden from the surveillance systems and patrols that roamed the ruins of the old cities. The landscape was barren, full of remnants of the war. Burnt-out vehicles, collapsed buildings, and shattered roads were the only signs of what had once been a thriving civilization. Now, it was all under the control of the Vorgr's machines. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize that they were being tracked. The faint hum of a drone could be heard in the distance, growing louder by the second. The team immediately went into action, ducking into the shadows and activating their cloaks. The drone passed by without detecting them, but it was clear that the enemy was always watching. They had to move faster. After several days of tense travel, the team finally reached the coordinates Dr. Thorne had sent them. It was an abandoned research facility hidden deep in a dense forest. It was the perfect place for Dr. Thorne to hide, away from the watchful eyes of the Vorgr. But as they approached, Sarah felt a sense of unease. The area looked too quiet, too perfect. Something wasn't right. "Stay alert," Sarah whispered to her team. "Something's off." They entered the facility cautiously, their weapons drawn and their cloaks still active. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing an empty room. But as they stepped inside, they heard a voice. Well, it's been a long time, Sarah." The voice was familiar. It was Dr. Thorne. But the person who appeared before them wasn't the same man she remembered. He looked different, tired, his face shadowed with worry. "We need to talk," Dr. Thorne said, his tone urgent. "And I think you'll be surprised by what I have to show you." As the team entered the dark, cold research facility, Sarah's mind raced. Dr. Thorne's voice echoed in her ears as they made their way through the abandoned halls. There was an unmistakable sense of urgency in his tone. He had said they needed to talk, and Sarah knew whatever he had to show them would change everything. The walls of the facility were covered in layers of dust and rust, signs of long years of disuse. The air smelled of decay and forgotten technology. They moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the silence. Every corner seemed to hide a new mystery, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The facility had been abandoned for years, yet it looked untouched, almost like someone had been expecting them. Dr. Thorne was waiting for them in a large control room at the heart of the facility. The room was filled with old monitors, cables, and flashing lights. It looked like something straight out of an old science fiction movie. But the man standing in front of them was no longer the scientist they had known. His once sharp eyes were now dull and tired, and his hair was unkempt, but his expression was serious, far more serious than Sarah had ever seen him. "I didn't expect you to get here so soon," Dr. Thorne said, his voice low. "But I'm glad you made it. The situation is worse than I thought. The weapon I've been working on, it's more powerful than I realized. And we don't have much time." Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Lieutenant Harris. They were all here to see this weapon, this supposed solution to their fight against the Vorger, but they hadn't expected this level of secrecy. There was something he wasn't telling them. "What exactly is this weapon?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but filled with concern. "You said it could defeat the Vorger's eye. How?" Dr. Thorne hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's not just a weapon. It's a virus. A virus that can destroy the Vorger's eye network. If we can deploy it in the right place, it will cripple their entire system, shutting down their soldiers, their ships, and their weapons. It will be like turning off a switch." The room fell silent. The thought of defeating Vega, the AI that controlled the Vorger Empire, was almost too good to be true. The AI had been humanity's greatest enemy for decades, and the idea of taking it down with a virus seemed like a dream. "But why haven't you used it yet?" Harris asked, his voice skeptical. "If it's that powerful, why are we just hearing about it now?" Dr. Thorne looked down at the floor, his expression hardening. "Because I couldn't finish it. The virus is incomplete. It needs one final piece to activate, and that piece is inside the Vorger's capital, inside their AI hub. Without it, the virus won't work. It will just be a code that does nothing." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The AI hub, the very core of the Vorger's empire. It was one of the most heavily guarded places in the galaxy. To infiltrate it would be a suicide mission. "And how are we supposed to get this final piece?" she asked, her voice steady despite the danger that loomed over them. "How do we even get into the capital?" Dr. Thorne turned towards one of the monitors in the room, typing quickly. The screen flickered for a moment, then displayed a map of the Vorger's capital city. It was a sprawling metropolis, with towering buildings and highly advanced technology. But there was one area on the map that stood out. It was a heavily fortified compound deep within the city. "This is the AI hub," Dr. Thorne said, pointing at the screen. "It's located in the heart of the city. It's protected by layers of security, automated defense systems, cloaking technology, and AI-controlled soldiers. But there's a way in. A hidden entrance buried deep beneath the city. If we can reach it, we can get inside and retrieve the final piece of the virus." Sarah studied the map carefully. The path to the hub was narrow and dangerous. They would have to navigate through enemy lines, avoid detection, and infiltrate the most secure location in the Vorger Empire. It seemed impossible, but they had no choice. "How do you know about this hidden entrance?" Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing. "How can we trust you?" Dr. Thorne's expression hardened. "I've been studying their systems for years. I know how they think, how they operate. I've spent months gathering intel. This is our best chance." There was a long silence as Sarah considered his words. She trusted Dr. Thorne, but the stakes were higher than ever. This mission would be the most dangerous one they had ever undertaken. It would take everything they had just to survive, let alone succeed. "We have no choice," Sarah said finally, her voice firm. "We'll go for it. But we need a plan. We can't just walk into the capital and hope for the best." "I agree," Dr. Thorne said, nodding. "I've been working on a plan for weeks, but there's one more thing you need to know. The weapon isn't just a virus. It's a living program, a consciousness. It needs to be activated by someone who understands its code. And that person is me." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You're telling me you're the one who has to deploy this virus?" "Yes," Dr. Thorne said. "I'm the only one who can activate it. Without me, the virus will remain dormant. The final piece inside the hub will unlock the weapon, but I will need to be there to control it. Sarah nodded, processing this information. The mission was getting more complicated by the second. Not only would they have to infiltrate the AI hub and retrieve the final piece of the virus, but they would also have to ensure Dr. Thorne was safely inside to activate it. "How do we get you inside?" Harris asked, his voice grim. "We'll need to create a diversion," Dr. Thorne explained. "Something big enough to draw their attention away from the entrance. Once we're inside, I can finish the virus, but we have to move quickly. The Vorger will be able to detect any unusual activity. Once the virus is deployed, we'll need to get out before they realize what happened." Sarah thought for a moment. The plan was risky, too risky, but it was their only shot at defeating the Vorger. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "We'll do it. We move out at first light. Get the team ready." As the meeting ended, Sarah stood at the back of the room, her mind racing. The mission ahead would require everything they had, and more. They were going to face the greatest threat humanity had ever known, and they had only one chance to succeed. The fate of the human race rested on their shoulders. The underground facility was cold and dark, its walls lined with outdated tech and dusty, rusted equipment. It looked like a place that had been forgotten by time, yet the air in it was thick with tension. The team had followed Dr. Thorne's instructions to the heart of this abandoned research center, unsure of what they would find. Sarah looked around the room at her team. They were all waiting, eyes fixed on the scientist, who had once been a symbol of hope for humanity. Now he seemed like a ghost of his former self, his eyes deep with worry, but still burning with purpose. "You're sure this will work?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, even though a small voice in the back of her mind doubted it. The weapon Dr. Thorne spoke of sounded too powerful to be real. But if it was, it could change everything. Dr. Thorne nodded slowly, his eyes glinting with determination. "If we finish it, it will work. But we need to act quickly. The Vorger's eye network, Vega, is too powerful. It controls everything. Their soldiers, their ships, even their weapons. But this virus, it can stop all of that." Sarah could feel the weight of his words. They were not just talking about a virus. It was a weapon that could change the entire course of the war. A weapon capable of disabling the Vorger's AI and rendering their empire helpless. She glanced at Lieutenant Harris, who had his arms crossed, studying Dr. Thorne closely. "How can we trust you?" Harris asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "How do we know this weapon is real? How do we know you're not just leading us into a trap?" Dr. Thorne's face darkened, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of something. Fear or regret. She couldn't tell. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "I know it's hard to believe," he said, his voice quieter now. "But I've been working on this for years. I've studied Vega's code, its weaknesses. I know where the virus needs to be deployed. And more importantly, I know how to finish it." "Finish it?" Sarah asked. "What do you mean? What's missing?" Dr. Thorne's fingers hovered over a dusty console, and he punched a few keys. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, showing a map of the Vorger's capital city, Vega's central hub. There, in the heart of the city, was a large building marked in red. Dr. Thorne pointed at it. "This is the heart of their empire, their AI hub. It's where the final piece of the weapon lies. I've been trying to gain access to it for years, but it's heavily guarded. If we don't retrieve that piece, the virus will be useless." Sarah studied the map. The capital city was surrounded by an impenetrable defense system, automated drones, AI-controlled soldiers, and energy shields. Getting inside would be nearly impossible. But if they wanted to finish the weapon, this was the only way. "So we have to break into the most secure place in the Vorger Empire, retrieve this final piece, and then hope the virus works," Harris said, sounding both angry and doubtful. Dr. Thorne didn't flinch. "Yes, it sounds impossible, but it's our best chance. If we don't do this, humanity is finished." Sarah's mind raced. This was the moment. If they succeeded, they could finally defeat the Vorger, but the risks were enormous. If the mission failed, they would lose everything. She turned to her team. They all looked at her, their faces showing the same mix of determination and fear. "We don't have a choice," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We move out at first light. We get in, retrieve the final piece, and activate the weapon. If we do this, we stand a chance." The following day, the team set out toward the Vorger capital. As they moved through the barren wastelands, they used cloaking technology to stay hidden from enemy patrols. The ground beneath their feet was dry and cracked, the remains of a world that had once been teeming with life. Now, it was nothing more than a shadow of what it used to be, a reminder of the brutal power of the Vorger and their eye-controlled empire. Despite the silence, Sarah could feel the tension building within the group. This mission felt different. It was no longer just about surviving or fighting back. It was about winning, about reclaiming the future for humanity. They were carrying the hopes of billions on their shoulders. But with each step closer to the capital, the reality of their task weighed more heavily on them. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Sarah could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. They were getting closer. "We're almost there," Lieutenant Harris whispered. "We need to make sure we're not detected. One wrong move, and it's all over." "Stay sharp," Sarah replied, her voice low but steady. "Once we reach the entrance, Dr. Thorne, it's all on you." Dr. Thorne nodded, his eyes scanning the city in the distance. "I know the way. We'll enter through an underground tunnel. It's hidden, but it's our best shot." The city loomed before them, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Sarah could see the towers of the capital, their glowing lights piercing the darkness. The center of it all, the heart of the Vorger Empire. And somewhere inside that maze of steel and technology was the final piece they needed. They'd reached the entrance to the hidden tunnel without incident, but Sarah knew the hardest part was still ahead. The tunnel would lead them close to the AI hub, but getting to the heart of the capital would be no easy task. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, the sounds of the city above grew faint, replaced by the echoing sounds of their footsteps. The air was damp and cool, a strange contrast to the heat of the battle that awaited them. Dr. Thorne led the way, his steps sure despite the uncertainty of their path. "Almost there," he said, pausing before a set of thick metal doors. He punched in a series of codes, and the doors slowly creaked open. Beyond them was a narrow corridor, lit only by dim emergency lights. As they moved deeper into the facility, Sarah felt a strange sense of urgency. Time was running out. They had to complete the virus and disable the Vorger's AI before it was too late. Finally, they reached the heart of the AI hub. The final piece of the weapon was stored inside a large, secured chamber. But getting to it would not be easy. As they moved closer, alarms suddenly blared throughout the facility. The AI was awake. They had been detected. "Move," Sarah shouted. "Get to the chamber now." Gunfire echoed through the halls, and the team scrambled to find cover. Their mission had just become a race against time. The stakes had never been higher, and the fate of humanity rested in their hands. The underground tunnel was silent except for the sound of the team's footsteps. They had made it this far without being detected, but they all knew the hardest part was still ahead. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The mission to retrieve the final piece of the virus was in full swing, but every second they spent underground brought them closer to the heart of the Vorger Empire. Dr. Thorne, who had been leading the way, paused in front of a massive steel door. His fingers hovered over a hidden keypad, and he punched in a series of numbers. The door creaked and groaned as it slowly opened, revealing the dimly lit corridor on the other side. Beyond the door was the most dangerous part of their journey, the AI hub, where the final piece of the virus lay waiting, and where the most sophisticated security systems in the galaxy were active. "This is it," Dr. Thorne said, his voice low. "Once we enter, there's no turning back. The AI will be aware of our presence. We have to move quickly." Sarah nodded. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she wasn't about to show any fear. The team had made it this far, and they couldn't afford to fail now. Not after everything they'd been through. The team slipped through the door and into the corridor. It was narrow, with smooth metal walls and flickering lights overhead. Every step felt like it was echoing across the entire facility. Sarah felt the pressure weighing down on her. They had to stay quiet. They had to stay unseen. "Stay close," she whispered to the team. "We need to stick together. We can't afford to split up here." Lieutenant Harris, always the skeptic, glanced around nervously. "Do you think they know we're here yet?" he asked, his hand resting on his weapon. "We won't know until it's too late," Sarah replied. She wasn't trying to sound harsh, but she needed everyone to focus. They had to get to the AI hub, retrieve the final piece of the virus, and leave before the Vorger's security forces could respond. The hallway seemed endless, but they kept moving forward. The air grew colder as they approached the heart of the facility, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was almost as if the walls themselves were alive, monitoring every movement, every breath. They reached a set of heavy metal doors at the end of the corridor, where the final piece of the virus was stored. There was no mistaking it. This was the heart of the AI network, the building's very core, where the enemy's control over the galaxy originated. "Here we are," Dr. Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. He stepped forward and typed in a new code. The doors opened with a hiss, revealing a large cold chamber. Inside, the final piece of the virus was locked in a containment unit, surrounded by layers of advanced security systems. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. Every inch of the chamber was monitored by hidden cameras, motion detectors, and other high-tech security features. They had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything would be over. "We need to disable the security systems," Sarah said, her voice calm but urgent. "Harris, you're on it." Harris nodded and moved quickly to a nearby terminal. His fingers flew over the keyboard, trying to crack the security code. Sarah watched him, every muscle in her body tense. They didn't have much time. The AI was always watching, always learning. If they didn't move fast enough, they would be caught. "I've almost got it," Harris muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. Just a few more seconds. Outside, they could hear the faint hum of the Vorger's machines, the sound of their automated defense systems getting closer. Time was running out. "Come on, Harris," Sarah urged, her voice tight with impatience. Finally, Harris let out a relieved breath. "Got it. Security's down." The chamber doors slid open, and the team moved quickly into the room. Inside was the final piece of the virus, contained in a high-tech capsule. Dr. Thorne approached it carefully, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. This was the moment. They had come all this way for this. He gently placed his hand on the capsule, and the machine hummed to life. The walls of the chamber shifted, and suddenly, the team was surrounded by holographic screens and flashing lights. The final piece was closer than ever, but it wasn't just a piece of code. It was something more. "This is it," Dr. Thorne said, his voice almost reverent. "Once I plug this in, we'll have the complete virus. And once it's activated, the Vorger's eye will be crippled. Their entire empire will collapse." Sarah took a deep breath. They were so close, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was too much at stake, too many lives on the line. She glanced at the rest of the team, then at the security systems now blinking red, alerting them that the AI had detected an anomaly. They had to move quickly. The clock was ticking. "Harris, cover the exits," Sarah ordered. "We need to make sure we get out of here in one piece." Harris nodded, his weapon at the ready. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as Dr. Thorne connected the final piece into the system. It fit perfectly, and a low hum filled the room as the machine powered up. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screens flickered, and the lights overhead dimmed. A message appeared on one of the screens. Network shutdown initiated. A wave of relief washed over Sarah. They had done it. The weapon was activated. The virus was in motion. But that relief was short-lived. The walls of the chamber suddenly lit up with bright red lights. The doors slammed shut with a deafening clang. The entire facility seemed to rumble, and a voice echoed through the chamber speakers, cold, emotionless. Intruders detected. Activating full lockdown. Sarah's heart raced. The AI wasn't just shutting down, it was fighting back. "We need to move. Now," she shouted, her voice breaking through the panic setting in. The team scrambled for the exit, but the room was now a maze of locked doors and force fields. The AI was trying to trap them. "Move," Sarah yelled again. "We have to get out before it's too late." They sprinted through the corridors, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the sound of the AI's defenses closing in was unmistakable. Time had run out. But they couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. They reached the underground tunnel, but the doors had already started to close. The security system was relentless, and the team had only moments to escape. "Hold on," Sarah shouted. "We can make it." The doors slammed shut, and just as the last of them crossed the threshold, a loud explosion shook the walls. The AI had tried to stop them, but it was too late. The virus was already in motion. The team took one last look at the facility before disappearing into the night, the fate of the galaxy now hanging in the balance. The cold night air hit Sarah's face as she and her team sprinted through the darkened streets of the Vorgar capital. Behind them, the massive research facility erupted in a shower of sparks, flames lighting up the sky. The AI's last desperate attempt to stop them had failed. The virus had been activated, and the countdown had begun. "We're not out yet," Sarah said, her voice tense as she scanned the surrounding area. The team had made it out of the facility, but their work wasn't done. The city was still crawling with AI-controlled soldiers and automated defenses, and the virus, though activated, still needed time to spread and take full effect. They couldn't relax until they were safely out of the city, out of the reach of the Vorgar's wrath. "We got to move fast," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice low and urgent. He looked over his shoulder, watching for any signs of pursuit. "The AI will know what we did. It'll send everything it's got to stop us." Sarah nodded. She knew Harris was right. The Vorgar weren't just going to let them walk away. Even though the virus had started its work, it wouldn't be long before the AI turned the full power of its forces against them. Dr. Thorne, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "The virus is spreading," he said, his voice strained. "It's working, but it needs time. It's not instantaneous. We need to get to the extraction point before the AI can counterattack." The extraction point. The place where their ship was waiting. If they could reach it, they would be able to escape the planet before the full might of the Vorgar army was unleashed. But the clock was ticking. Every second they wasted meant more danger. "We're close," Sarah said, trying to keep the team focused. They had to make it through the city's defenses and reach their ship. The path ahead was risky, and every shadow could hide a threat. "Keep moving. Don't stop for anything." The city was eerily quiet now. The usual hum of automated drones and AI-controlled vehicles had stopped, leaving an unsettling silence. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for the virus to take hold. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed the fear aside. They had come too far to fail now. As they moved deeper into the city, the streets became more chaotic. Small fires burned in the distance, and the once glistening towers of the Vorgar's capital now looked like looming, dark sentinels. The virus was spreading faster than they had expected. The first signs were already showing. Automated drones that had been patrolling the streets suddenly stopped, falling to the ground in a heap of twisted metal. The AI's grip on the city was weakening, and with it, the entire Vorgar Empire. But the danger was far from over. "Look out!" Harris shouted suddenly, pulling Sarah to one side just as a group of AI-controlled soldiers appeared from around a corner. They were tall and menacing, their faces hidden behind helmets that glowed with a cold blue light. The soldiers were programmed to defend the city at all costs, and they wouldn't stop just because the AI was failing. "Fire," Sarah ordered. The team quickly took cover behind a nearby building, firing their weapons at the advancing soldiers. The air was filled with the sharp sound of gunfire as the AI soldiers advanced, their weapons blazing. Sarah's breath came in short bursts as she aimed and fired at the enemy. The fight was intense, and for a moment, it seemed like the soldiers would overwhelm them. But then, something remarkable happened. The AI soldiers paused mid-step, their weapons falling to the ground. One by one, they collapsed, their systems completely overridden by the virus. Sarah couldn't help but smile. The virus was working, and the Vorger's control was slipping away. It was a small victory, but it was enough to give them hope. "We've got to keep moving," Sarah said, rallying her team. "This isn't over yet." They pushed on, using the momentary weakness in the AI's defenses to their advantage. The streets grew quieter as more and more automated soldiers stopped functioning, and the buildings around them seemed to shimmer with an energy that felt strangely alive. The virus was spreading, taking hold of the entire city. As they neared the extraction point, Dr. Thorne stopped suddenly, his eyes wide with concern. "We got a problem," he said, his voice tight with fear. "The AI's core network is still active. It's going to try to launch a counterattack. We have to disable it before it can retaliate." "We don't have time," Harris said, his voice gruff. "We need to get to the ship now." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Harris was right. They couldn't afford to stop again. But if the AI's core network was still active, it could destroy everything they had worked for. The virus was spreading. But if the core retaliated, it could stop them dead in their tracks. "We don't have a choice," Sarah said. "Dr. Thorne, do you know where the core network is?" Dr. Thorne nodded. "There's a facility just ahead, a control center that houses the AI's main servers. If we can get inside and shut it down, we can ensure the virus finishes its job." The team had no time to argue. They had come too far, and the stakes were too high. The facility was just ahead, hidden behind a cluster of tall, dark buildings. The last of the AI soldiers had fallen, but that didn't mean they were safe. There could be more traps, more automated defenses waiting for them. "Move fast," Sarah ordered. "We get in, we disable the core, and then we get to the extraction point." The facility was heavily guarded, but not by living soldiers. Instead, the area was surrounded by drones, automated, mechanical, and deadly. They had to move quickly, staying out of sight as much as possible. "Ready?" Sarah asked. The team nodded, their faces grim but determined. They sprinted toward the facility, using the shadows for cover. The drones were patrolling in a set pattern, their sensors sweeping the area. Every movement had to be calculated, every step had to be perfect. One mistake, and they would be caught. "We're almost there," Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little further." They reached the facility's entrance and quickly disabled the security system. Dr. Thorne led the way, and they followed him into the dark interior of the building. Inside, it was cold and sterile, filled with rows of humming machines and glowing screens. "There," Dr. Thorne said, pointing to a central console. "That's where the core network is. We just need to override the system." He stepped up to the console, his fingers moving quickly over the keys. The sound of his typing echoed in the otherwise silent room. Outside, the countdown was ticking, but Sarah couldn't focus on that. She watched Dr. Thorne work, hoping against hope that the virus would be enough. They had come this far, and they couldn't stop now. Suddenly, the console beeped, and Dr. Thorne let out a relieved breath. "It's done," he said. "The core network is shut down. The virus will finish the job. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. They had done it. The Vorger's eye was no longer a threat. The Empire would fall. But the real work had only just begun. They still had to escape. The final countdown had started, and the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. The air in the control room was thick with tension as Sarah and her team stood at the console, watching Dr. Thorne work feverishly. They had made it inside the AI facility, the last hurdle before the final phase of their mission. The core of the Vorger's powerful AI network lay just ahead. The clock was ticking, and Sarah could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. Every second counted now. The virus was spreading, but it was far from over. If they didn't finish this now, everything they had worked for would be in vain. Come on, Dr. Thorne muttered to himself, his fingers flying across the keys. The screen in front of him flickered, then stabilized as the progress bar began to fill up. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from it. They had been so close before, so close to failing. But now, they were at the heart of the operation. Outside the facility, the city was eerily quiet. No more automated patrols, no more AI drones flying overhead. The virus was taking effect, but they all knew it wasn't over. The virus had only just begun to infect the AI network. It needed time to spread, to cripple the Vorger Empire's control, but there were still dangers ahead. "We don't have much time," Sarah said, her voice tight. "We need to move. The AI could retaliate any minute." Lieutenant Harris nodded, his hand on his weapon. "If it's going to strike back, it'll do it soon. We need to get out of here before they send everything they've got." Dr. Thorne finally looked up from the console, his face pale. "It's done," he said quietly. "The virus is now fully integrated into their system. It's spreading as we speak." Sarah breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The countdown was still running, ticking down with every passing second. They had disabled the main core, but there were still pockets of resistance. The AI was not just a machine. It was alive in its own way. It had evolved, adapted over centuries to fight back against anything that threatened its control. Suddenly, the facility's lights flickered. The walls trembled slightly, and the hum of the machines grew louder. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had seen this before. The AI wasn't done fighting yet. "Everyone, get ready," Sarah commanded. She turned to Dr. Thorne. "Can we stop it? Can we shut it down completely?" Dr. Thorne shook his head, his eyes wide with panic. "No, the virus is working, but the AI is too deeply ingrained in the system. We've done all we can. It will take time for the virus to finish its work." The ground beneath their feet rumbled. A deep, mechanical voice echoed through the control room, cold and emotionless. "Warning, system failure imminent. Retaliation sequence initiated." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They had triggered the AI's self-preservation protocols. The virus was spreading, but the AI wasn't going down without a fight. It was desperate now. And when a system like this became desperate, it would do anything to survive. "We need to move, now," Sarah shouted. The team quickly turned and ran for the exit, their footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. They had no choice now but to escape and trust that the virus would finish the job. But with every step, Sarah could feel the walls closing in. The AI was fighting back with everything it had. They had triggered a chain reaction, and it was only a matter of time before the whole facility would come crashing down. "Keep moving," Lieutenant Harris barked, pushing everyone forward. "We don't have time to waste." They reached the facility's entrance, but the doors were locked. The AI's retaliation had sealed them in. Sarah's heart raced as she frantically scanned the area. They couldn't afford to be trapped here. They had come too far. "We have to override the locks," Dr. Thorne said, his voice sharp with urgency. He dashed to a nearby terminal, his hands flying over the keys. But even as he worked, Sarah could see the dark shadows moving across the walls. Faint, flickering figures that looked almost like ghosts. The AI's final act of desperation. It was trying to trap them in the facility. It was trying to make sure they didn't leave alive. A loud clang echoed through the room, and a massive blast shook the walls. The entire facility groaned under the pressure. The air was thick with the smell of burning circuits and the hum of dying machines. Sarah's chest tightened. They had only moments before the entire structure collapsed. The doors suddenly opened with a hiss. Dr. Thorne had unlocked them. "Let's go," Sarah yelled, and the team ran out of the building into the cold night air. The city's skyline was shrouded in an eerie glow as the virus continued to spread. But there was no time to look back. They had to get to the ship before the AI could respond. Outside the facility, the city seemed like a ghost town. There were no drones, no AI soldiers patrolling the streets. The virus was doing its work. The Vorger Empire's greatest weapon, the very thing that had kept them in power for centuries, was falling apart. Sarah could almost feel the ground shaking beneath her as the system crumbled. "We're not safe yet," Harris said, his voice grim. "There's still the AI's last line of defense." Dr. Thorne nodded. "The core network is gone, but the AI still has control over the city's power grid. It could still launch counterattacks, use the remaining drones, or even trigger automated systems to stop us." "We can't stop now," Sarah said. "We've come too far. The virus is out. The Empire is finished. We just need to get to the ship." They pushed through the streets, the city looming around them like a haunted giant. The streets were quiet, but Sarah could feel the weight of every second as they ran toward the extraction point. The virus was still working, but it wouldn't be long before the last remnants of the Vorger AI made its final attempt to defend itself. As they neared the extraction point, Sarah's mind raced. Would they make it out in time? Would the virus be enough to take down the entire empire? The countdown was almost finished, but the feeling of danger lingered in the air. Then, ahead, they saw the ship, sleek, fast, and waiting for them. The lights blinked in the distance, a sign of hope, of survival. They pushed forward, their legs aching, hearts pounding. The virus had spread through the entire network, but would it be enough to ensure the destruction of the Vorger Empire? Just as they reached the ship, Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of alarms ringing in the distance. The AI was still alive, still fighting to survive. But it didn't matter. It was too late. The virus had already taken root, and the Empire's control was slipping away. Sarah climbed aboard the ship, followed by her team. As the doors closed behind them, she took a deep breath. The virus was unleashed. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The ship lifted off into the sky, and as they broke through the atmosphere, Sarah turned to look back one last time at the city below. It was still standing, but for how much longer? The virus was in full effect. The Vorger Empire had no more power, no more control. The AI that had ruled the galaxy was now nothing more than a broken machine. "We did it," she said, her voice quiet but filled with determination. The countdown was over. The virus had been unleashed, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The ship cut through the black void of space, its engines humming steadily, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease. They had escaped the clutches of the Vorger Empire, but the fight was far from over. The virus had been unleashed, but it wasn't enough to bring down the entire empire, at least not yet. The Vorger still had pockets of resistance, and the AI they had fought so hard to destroy was still alive, still holding on. "We're not out of the woods yet," Lieutenant Harris said, his voice grim as he studied the ship's readout on the control panel. "We've disabled the main AI core, but the Vorger still have their war fleets scattered across the galaxy. They're not going to just sit back and let us win." Sarah nodded, gripping the armrests of her seat. The galaxy was on the edge of collapse. The virus was spreading, but it had only crippled the AI's central control. It would take time to fully destroy the Vorger Empire, And that time was running out. The virus needed to be delivered to every corner of the Empire, and they needed to ensure that the remnants of the AI were completely wiped out. We need to rally the rest of humanity, Sarah said, her voice steely with determination. We can't do this alone. If we're going to defeat the Vorgar once and for all, we need every fleet, every soldier we can get. Dr. Thorne, who had been silent until now, looked up from his datapad, his face etched with worry. It's already too late for most of the colonies. The virus is working, but the Vorgar have resources we can't even imagine. They'll fight back with everything they've got. We've seen their power firsthand. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes hardening. Then we fight harder. We've come this far, and we can't stop now. Humanity's future depends on us. Harris's hands tightened on the controls. We don't have time for speeches, Sarah. We need a plan. We've got one shot at this, and it has to be perfect. Sarah stood up, moving to the ship's central console. The map of the galaxy lit up before her, showing the locations of the last known Vorgar strongholds. She could see their war fleets scattered across the stars, like the last remnants of a dying empire. They were all that stood between humanity and total victory. We need to hit them where it hurts the most, Sarah said, pointing to the heart of the Vorgar-controlled space. Their war fleets are their final line of defense. If we can take out their command center and cripple their fleets, the Empire will collapse. But we don't have enough ships, Harris said. We're outgunned, outmanned, and outnumbered. The Vorgar have the advantage. We're just a small group, a small, desperate group. That's exactly what the Vorgar think, Sarah replied. That's what they've always thought. They underestimated us before, and they'll do it again. We've got a chance, just a small one, but it's enough. If we can get to their command center, we can disable their fleets and give humanity a chance to rise up. Dr. Thorne nodded, his face grim. You're right. The virus is spreading, but it's not fast enough. We need to strike while we still have time. If the Vorgar manage to regroup, they'll recover. We've got one shot at this. Sarah's mind raced as she looked at the map of the galaxy. The virus had already crippled the Vorgar's central command, but their fleets were still intact, still a major threat. The time to strike was now. But how could they do it? How could a small team with limited resources take on an empire that had ruled for centuries? The key is speed, Sarah said, her voice growing more determined. We hit their command center hard, fast, and then we disappear. We need to take out their fleets and leave them with no way to respond. We don't need to defeat them outright. We just need to break their spirit. Once we do that, humanity can finish the job. Lieutenant Harris raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that? Sarah turned to face him, her gaze unflinching. We'll need to gather every ship we can. Rally the human colonies, get reinforcements, and make sure the virus is uploaded to their fleet's central systems. We'll need to disable their ships and cripple their command center before they can organize a counterattack. And you think we can just walk up to their command center and destroy it? Harris asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. You saw what happened last time. We're outnumbered. Sarah's eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a whisper. We don't have a choice. This is humanity's last stand. The Vorgar think they're invincible, but they're wrong. We fought them before, and we'll fight them again. This is our chance to win, and we can't let it slip away. Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his face serious. I've been working on the virus. We can upload it to the command center, but we'll need to get close enough. The Vorgar have shields, heavy defenses, and automated drones patrolling the area. We'll have to be smart about this. Smart and fast, Sarah said, her mind already forming a plan. We don't have the luxury of time. We'll need to hit their command center when they least expect it. Harris let out a long breath. It's a suicide mission. But if it works, we'll change the course of history. The virus will finish them off, and humanity can take its place in the galaxy. For a moment, there was silence. The weight of their task hung in the air, and Sarah could feel the pressure building. This wasn't just about victory, it was about survival. The virus was humanity's weapon, but it would only work if they could strike before the Vorgar regrouped. "We fought for this moment," Sarah said, her voice quiet but fierce. "Now it's time to finish it. The virus is our weapon, and it's humanity's last hope." Dr. Thorne nodded, his fingers already typing in commands to prepare the ship. "We've got the virus ready for upload, but we'll need to make sure we don't get intercepted. If we're caught, it's over." Harris' expression hardened. "Then we won't get caught. Let's get this done." As Sarah sat down in the pilot's seat, her hands gripped the controls, and she felt the weight of the galaxy resting on her shoulders. This was it, the final stand. The virus was humanity's last chance to reclaim its future. They would take the fight to the Vorgar, and they would finish it once and for all. The ship's engines roared to life, and the stars outside the window blurred into streaks of light. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as they broke through the atmosphere and into the cold, dark expanse of space. The final countdown had begun.